Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua.
Good afternoon. I hope you all well.
UK and Europe. First of our gratitude of God is that we are staying healthy, so we can able to attend this focus group discussion. I'd like to express appreciation in energy finance investment mobilization CEFIM of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) and International Energy Agency (IEA) for support and excellent cooperation to organize FGD series. Today, FGD with the theme approaches to emission trading system scheme in the power sector is the first of the 4 planned FGD. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia had ratified the Paris Agreement through the Law number 16 of 2016 concerning the enactment of Paris Agreement to the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. Government of Indonesia has strong commitment to reduce the greenhouse gas emission as stated in the nationally determined contribution target by 29% with its capabilities and 41% with international support by 2030. The energy sector aims to reduce CO2 emission by 314 million tons of CO2 equivalent, or 11% of the business as usual scenario for their own capabilities. According to the Article 52 of Government Regulation number 46 of 2017 on the environmental economic instrument, emission trading is enforced not later than 7 years since the regulation was enacted in November 10, 2024. As preparation to mandatory stage, the Directorate General of Electricity has conducted a pilot phase in voluntary scheme of implementation emission trading system. This implementation in line with the carbon economic value policy. Directorate of Engineering and Environment of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources is collaborating with the OECD's Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilisation and the International Energy Agency in developing the emission trading system scheme through the
You muted yourself, Pak Vanha.
Pak Wanhar mute ya Pak, mute Pak. Ya Bapak mute Pak.
Pak Wanhar mute Pak.
Oh, iya.
Dominic, will you unmute Pak Wanhar?
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear my voice?
Yeah. You mute yourself, Pak.
It's okay?
Now it's okay, Pak.
Okay. Thank you. On this first FGD, we will to discuss the objectives and progress of implementing the ETS trial that that have been carried out and exchange ideas about the international approach and experience in designing and implementing ETS scheme in the electricity sector. International experts will share lessons learned in designing and implementing ETS scheme to be adapted to the Indonesian context. The open discussion that brought together representatives from government, agency, development partners, and the private sector and the other stakeholders in the FGD is intended to share information and identify priority area for the ETS development in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, in the energy sector, especially in coal-fired power plant, we have recently implemented ETS trial as representative to implement ETS in mandatory phase. We are aware that we still need input and more information to develop our ETS. Hopefully, this FGD will give us more information and knowledge to improve our ETS. Hence, I hope participants can participate actively in this discussion. So we have fruitful discussion. And at the end, once again, I would like to express my gratitude toward CEFIM, OECD, and IEA for support this FGD. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Wanhar atas opening.
Thank you, Mr. Wanhar, for your opening remark. And we shall continue the second opening remark by Ms. Cecilia Tam from OECD CEFIM team leader.
Thank you very much, Pak Bati. Dear Pak Wanhar, Pak Gigi, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here today to welcome all of you to a first in a series of 4 focus group discussions that have been designed to support Indonesia's emissions trading scheme for the power sector. We're pleased to be building on a fruitful collaboration between the OECD and the government of Indonesia. The CEFIM program supports Indonesia's efforts to mobilize domestic and foreign sources of finance to accelerate investments into the clean energy sector. It draws from OECD's extensive work on green finance and investment. I'd like to commend DG Electricity for the development of its emissions trading scheme in the trial period, and to thank Pak Wanhar and Pak Gigi from DG Electricity for this collaboration to support their efforts in improving the design of the emissions trading scheme for the power sector, and to thank your teams for their support in organizing today's FGD. I'd also like to thank my colleagues from the IEA, Sarah Morif and Karen McNamara, and their colleagues for collaborating with us on this series of focus group discussions, and for sharing with us today their knowledge and experience in working with other countries on designing ETS for the power sector. I'd like to thank our Indonesian experts for presenting the progress to date on the emissions trading, on the ETS development in this trial period, and hope this series of FGDs will provide useful inputs as you continue to advance on your ETS design. I'd also like to thank the international experts for taking the time to share their experiences, as well as for their valuable insights and advice to our Indonesian colleagues. Finally, thank you to all the stakeholders attending today. Your actions will be essential to implement a clean energy transition in Indonesia. As I mentioned, today's FGD will be a first in a series of 4 focus group discussions that the IEA, together with the OECD, will be co-organizing with DG Electricity to provide a platform for sharing international experience and to provide technical support on a number of critical areas in the development of the ETS for the power sector. As Pak Bati mentioned, this first FGD will provide an overview and kickoff to the series of future FGDs. We'll introduce a number of international cases and hear about progress made so far in Indonesia under the trial period. Next month, we will hold our second FGD focused around technical design elements of the Indonesian ETS, including setting of the emissions cap and determining how the price will be set and evolve, as well as options for recycling revenues raised. A third FGD will be organized early next year to look at regulatory and institutional aspects of ETS development. And finally, a fourth and final FGD will explore the linkages with international carbon markets And this will be organized towards the later part of a final summary paper from the discussions will be presented, presenting the conclusions and recommendations emerging from each of the 4 FGDs. And with that, I look forward to our discussion today, and now would like to pass the floor to Bati to provide us with, to facilitate our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Terima kasih, Pak Wanhar dan Cecilia.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Mr. Wanhar, for the opening remarks. Thank you for providing context to the audience for today's FGD. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today's FGD will continue in 3 sessions. The first is the Indonesia climate mitigation policy and prelim result from the trial. And the first session supposedly being moderated by Mr. Gigi, but he could not attend. That's why please allow me to guide the first session. And the second session, we'll talk about international approaches to ETS design. And our colleague from OECD CEFIM, Jeremy, will be the moderator, and then there will be open discussion, and there will be a Q&A in the third session. So let's move on to the first session. We'll talk about Indonesia's climate mitigation policy and preliminary results from the ETS scheme trial. We have approximately 45 minutes. We will have 3 resource speakers, and the first, we have Ms. Emma Rahmawati, MSc, Director of Climate Mitigation, DG Climate Change, Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And we have Mr. Bayu Nugroho, Coordinator of Electricity from DG Electricity MEMR, and Ms. Shofi Rukman, Director of Human Resource Management from PTPLN. And first of all, we will start from Ms. Emma Rahmawati, Director of Climate Mitigation, Ministry of Environment and Forestry. She will provide us context about Indonesia's climate goals and what is the contribution of the power sector.
The platform is yours, Bu. Monggo silakan, Bu.
The platform is yours, Ms. Emma.
In Jakarta, and good morning, colleagues in Europe. Distinguished participants, speakers, Ibu Cecilia Tan, and all representatives from OECD, from IEA, from ADB, PLN, and other participants. Please allow me to share the screen. First of all, I would like to thank to Ditjen Ketenagalistrikan, Pak Wanhar, and team FGD. I would like to inform you that with the government of Indonesia has enacted presidential regulation number 98 regarding carbon pricing for NDCs and low carbon development. From yesterday, we had a steering committee meeting, and then today and tomorrow we are at the technical level having a very detailed discussion on how we could operationalize this presidential regulation on carbon pricing. So I'm joining this FGD together with in the conjunction of the discussion of carbon pricing. So maybe some of slides are not yet updated with this new presidential regulation, but so far as the discussion just started for detailed operationalization the regulation. So I think we this FGD Pak Bati and also Pak Wanhar and team could be a forum that can collect some inputs and also ideas for the developing of ETS, for example, in particular in power sector, because compared to other sector in other sector, for example, in forestry. So I think this FGD could be benefit for us in enrichment of our process at national level. This is the scope of my presentation. So I would like to start with this these pictures, the pathway, how we could we have started from Paris to with the commitment announced by the president on the target of the first NDC, and then Ibu Minister has signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, and then we have ratification of Paris Agreement by law number 16 year 2016, and then we have submitted the first NDC. And then we prepared a roadmap of NDC mitigation in 2019, and then this year we submitted as a package together this slide is to give you pictures of our NDC. We have two elements: adaptation and mitigation. And on mitigation, we have increased our ambition in conditional, previously 38% and now is 41%. So we have an additional target for forestry and energy sector, 1.5% for each sector. For energy sector, we have target to reduce GHG emission for 314 million ton carbon dioxide equivalent, and then this is the how we divide this target for this energy efficiency, and then new and renewable energy, clean energy, fuel switching, and then for Aforo, this is this roadmap was discussed, and then we agreed together with all related units within Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So this is the details for detail of targets for each subsector, and then the amount of GHG emission that has to be reduced by 2030. And just to give you other example, our target in IPPU and also in waste sector, this is not much significant compared to forestry sector that account for 17.2%, and then energy sector for 11%. So the rest only account for long-term strategy, low carbon and climate resilience 2050 towards net zero emission in 2060 or sooner. So this is our commitment. The president has announced this in many events that our target is to be a net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. In this document, we have target to have peaking for all 5 sectors in 2030, with the level of GHG emission in 1,030 million ton carbon dioxide equivalent, and this level has to be assured by the net thing in follow sector. So these 3 graphs show you the trend that we are going to have peaking. Use the scenario of low carbon compatible with Paris Agreement or LCCP. So the other 2 scenarios, the CEPOS current policy scenario and transition scenario, do not give us the indication when will be the peaking. So the trend is still increasing in GHG emission. This for the details of how we could meet our target in follow sector. First, that we have to be a net sink in 2030, and this is the assumption and roadmap how we go forward from now on to 2050, and then for the reducing of deforestation, sustainable forest management for restoration of production forest, and then peat restoration, afforestation and deforestation, and also for in forest estate. For energy sector, we have assumption in that document. My apologies, the last of my slide in Bahasa Indonesia. We have the target here in roadmap of NDC mitigation. We refer to the current policy on national energy policy, and on 2025, we will provide the primary energy for 380 million TOE, and also for the energy mix from coal is 26%. And then we also refer all those numbers here, comparing what we refer in our roadmap and also in our national energy policy. And what we have done in our projection in 2060, we can see here for energy, primary energy in 2050. This is all the assumption, and also the supply mix in power sector in 2050, and also we use the assumption that for example here for energy consumption per capita is for around 3 giga per year, and then this for 2060 it's not yet agreed because we are still waiting for the completion of exercise that now is being is progressing under Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So as long as this exercise is then completed, we will prepare our net zero emission document to complement our long-term strategy 2050 document. All these assumptions basically refer to the current policies in before June 2021. We see that there are some fast progress in the discussion, and also there are some plan of regulation that will be provided by Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. For example, the plan for having regulation on CCS for carbon pricing, and then for the renewable energy. So this assumption will be changed, and also we are referring to the current statement by the minister in Glasgow that if there is international support, so there will be acceleration in coal phase out that we set in our LTS document, coal phase out in 2056, but it could be accelerated to around 2040. So all these assumptions will be changed. So for your information, please do not refer to this assumption, because this still under discussion. Is not. I guess that is not yet valid anymore, taking into account the current progress of deep discussion in all stakeholders towards energy. This is also our assumption. Basically, we refer to the current existing regulation, and in 2050 and also in 2060. How we going forward from this stage in July 2021 this year? So we have to focus for transportation and also for power, because from our data, this is the main subsector that contribute the biggest GHG emission. And also we could see that some technology intervention could play a role in a transition period. For example, the CCS, CCUS, and also BECCS, and also renewable energy. We also consider to have a nuclear power plant, but under LTS we put this plan after 2050. So
Bu Emma mungkin bisa
2051 with new technology, and then we also transportation, how we could increase the utilization of nuclear, and also electric vehicle. Halo, bagaimana Pak?
Mungkin
dibandingkan kami percepat saja Pak. Ya, baik. Kemudian we can see from our slide all this. Siap Pak. Yeah, is our recommendation that of GHG emission reduction. You can see here how the
Halo, Ibu Emma masih? Sudah Ibu ya?
Oh maaf ya. This is to give you the picture that the electricity generation mix with the use of coal is dominating the GHG emission level in Indonesia. So if we focus in power sector, it could solve the problem of GHG emission in general. You can see here the other graph. This is the total GHG emission in Indonesia in 2019 for 1.8 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent, and this is from energy sector account for around 34%, and this one here GHG emission from power, and then from transportation, and then from manufacture. This is
Bu Emma, kami tidak bisa melihat slide Ibu.
Oh, maaf Pak.
Dan mungkin bisa wrap up Bu, mungkin beberapa slide terakhir.
Baik, saya share saja nanti filenya Pak Fatih di chat box. Jadi tapi intinya begini, power sector that have moving, we could use this power sector as a role model for the overall sector for ETS. Thank you very much, Pak.
Terima kasih Bu Ami, Bu Emma atas penjelasannya, presentasi yang komprehensif.
Thank you, Ibu Emma, for the explanation. It is very comprehensive. A few notes on this. So probably this FGD, the series of FGD, can become an input for future discussions on carbon emission. And you already highlighted the importance of two bigger sectors, power and transportation. So today, we're going to talk about the power sector using the ETS scheme. Okay, let's continue to the second session. Pak Bayu Nugroho.
Beliau akan mendiskusikan tentang bagaimana sih pengalaman uji coba perdagangan karbon pada PLTU.
He will talk about the results from the ETS trial. What is the lesson learned and the challenge in the future? Pak Bayu, please. The floor is yours. Okay, thank you, Pak Bati.
Energy Finance and Investment Mobilisation, or CEFIM. Distinguished Ibu Emma Ramawati and Ibu Sophie Valenti Rukman, and also of FGD approaches to ETS scheme in power sector speakers. And distinguished to all invitees, ladies and gentlemen. I think through in my PowerPoint, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we know, government of Indonesia has strong commitment to reduce greenhouse gases or GHG. Mas Adan, tayangannya belum ya? Pak Adan? Pak Adan? Bisa dibantu teman yang lain nggak?
Mohon izin, Mas Tanto, boleh langsung di share screen kan Pak Bayu?
I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. Government of Indonesia, di slide 1 Pak Adan ya, have a strong commitment to reduce GHG, greenhouse gases emissions through setting up net zero emission. One is excellent utilization of new renewable energy, NRA, and two, reducing fossil fuel through carbon and tech and trading. In slide 2, Pak Adan, and covering of coal power plant with NRA, new renewable energy, and retirement of CEFIM, and 3, electric vehicle, and 4, excellent of electricity consumption on in household and industry, and 4, utilization and Pak Adan, sorry ini ya, slide nomor 2 ya, nomor 1 ya. Terlalu cepat Pak Adan. And 5 is utilization of carbon capture storage, CCS. Thus, according in Republic Indonesia introduction during COP21 in December 2015, the government of Indonesia has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 29% self-effort or 41% with international assistance by 2030 according to NDC, and be a leader summit on climate in April 2021, attracting investment in energy transition through the development of biofuels, lithium battery industry, and electric vehicles. And she is President President statement speech on August 16, 2021, that energy transition towards new renewable energy and the acceleration of a green technology-based economy will be an important change in our economy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, next, please. According to Government Regulation number 46 of 2017 about environmental economic instrument, the emission trading system must be implemented 7 years after the regulation issue, actually in November 2024, as a preparation for the implementation of the mandatory phase in 2025. Starting this year, the Directorate General of Electricity have been conducting Emission Trading System or ETS trial on full power plants, and the future will be implemented in other power plants. Implementation of ETS trial will be accordance with presidential regulation carbon pricing. In this trial ETS, there will be mechanisms such as a cap and trade and offset. In 2021 ETS trial, cap is determined by the government based on a weighted average of GHG emission intensity in 2019. While trading is activity for selling and buying the allowance to meet the GHG emission alone, and offset in GHG emission in one place that can be used to compensate for emission elsewhere. For a power plant units, there are above the cap have emission deficit, so they have to buy emission as a buyer and have a potential to do offset. And well, for units that are below to the cap have emission surplus, as a seller can sell their carbon unit to unit that have an emission deficit. The object of ETS trial are increasing GHG emission reduction to achieve NDC target, and B, implemented of cap emission in CEFIM, and D, strengthening measurement, reporting, and verification in inventory GHG emission, and D, raising awareness in implementation of carbon pricing, especially in cap and trade and offset. ETS trial are divided into categories of CEFIM by intelligence capacity and type of CEFIM, mine mode or non-mine mode. CEFIM capacity distribution in according to the MMR regulation 9/2020 on the efficiency of the electricity supply of the PT PLN Persero. The cap value based on the 2019 weighted average GHG emission intensity in each CEFIM groups, and considering in emission quota status with following value for CEFIM capacity more than 400 megawatt is 0.918 ton CO2 equivalent megawatt an hour. Cap for CEFIM with installed capacity between 1000 to 400 megawatt is 1.013 ton CO2 megawatt hour. And C cap for mine mode CEFIM with installation capacity between 10 megawatt to 400 megawatt is 1.094 ton CO2 megawatt hour. Next, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, ETS trial mechanism through energy efficiency subroto awards PSBP as following. Next, please. Mas Arden. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, ETS trial mechanism through energy efficiency subroto award or PSBA are follow participant report GHG emission in 2020 through Apple gathering, and participant confirm their participant to Directorate General of Electricity. Participant can trade and offset after confirm their participant and sending it to Directorate General of Electricity. Trial implementation period in March until August 2021. Reporting and transaction judge states. Trading is carried out not in the same power generation unit. Unit of CVP there are below to cap as a seller can trade the value their CO2 emission on the condition that they have carried out mitigation effort, either energy efficiency or EBT as of 2015 and with a transaction emission of 70% of the total surplus emission. So that after trading, the CO emission value of the unit remain below the cap value. Unit of CFVP that are above the cap as a buyer, they have to buy off other emission carbon unit by trading system for about 70% from their excess emission quota, while the rest of the remaining emission should be compensated through offset. Offset are determinant from the mitigation action of NRA power plant with a potential demand of 30%.
Pak Bayu, waktunya mungkin bisa dipercepat, Pak?
Ya.
Presentasi.
Mungkin langsung ke kesimpulan aja, Pak. Pas slide yang nomor.
I think you can go to the conclusion slide after this.
The resume of trial through subroto awards as a follow. There are 28 carbon transaction between participant unit of power plant with a total carbon transaction 455 ton of CO2 with average unit price of carbon use $2 ton of CO2. For offset activity, total carbon credit transaction generated under the same international certificate such as voluntary carbon standard, VCS or VRA about 4 and 5,000 tons of CO2 with average carbon unit price of €3 ton CO2. Kemudian pembukuan penurunan emisi or PPE or emission reduction regulation with issue by MER for only PSBA carbon credit to 22 248 ton CO2 with average carbon price Rp4.000 per ton CO2.
So the cost is 4,000 IDR per ton CO2.
In the electricity subsector, total increase during trial is 1.454 billion. We assume increase for stakeholder, for example, trading cost 1.227 billion in increase of CFPP. We are below the cap offered during GHG mitigation action. Another example, transaction for carbon credit offset for 236 miliar can be used and be invested for renewable energy power plant SDR4 to reduce GHG emission. This is our presentation, Pak Bati. Maybe the next can be follow in our presentation. Thank you, Pak Bati.
Terima kasih Pak Bayu atas sharingnya tentang
Thank you, Mr. Bayu, for your presentation on the ETS trial. At the time, it was conducted under the Subroto Award. So let us move on to Ms. Sophie Rukman, the Director of Human Resources Management, and she will share with us the PLN's experience. Before, Pak Bayu is from the government perspective. So how now the PLN as the utility companies in their ETS experience, does PLN conduct some simulation on the portion of cap and trading scenario? Ms. Sophie, the time is yours. How long do I have? You have 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna trying to make it fast. Okay, makasih Pak Bati. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Peace be upon us all.
Everyone. So distinguished Ms. Cecilia Tang, as a team leader, clean energy finance and investment mobilization, Bapak Wanhar, and also distinguished speakers, Ibu Emma, Bapak Bayu, Prof. Zhang Siliang, and also Insung Son, and all distinguished participants in this FGD. So first, we would like to say thank you to your invitation for PLN to sharing our experience in the emission trading on what we call it system trial. So some of our summary can be seen here that the Indonesian government aimed to reduce emission by 29% in 2030. And also we're gonna achieve the net zero emission by 2060. That it gonna be, it can be sooner. Carbon pricing is one of the strategic pillars for meeting NDC and also NZE targets. And this year, PLN has successfully to implement the carbon trading trial for the first time in Indonesia, which become a reference for the upcoming carbon tax implementation. The others that PLN is also established an internal framework to ensure the smooth implementation of the emission trading system and compliance with the tax carbon regulation. We also get the cap of the intensity of the greenhouse gas emission is one of the key factors that will determine the impact of the carbon pricing. So in the last, we know that according to our preliminary simulation, the cap is set to the same value as the trial cap. The emission trading portion balanced with the tax portion. So a 5% stricter caps could significantly reduce the share of the emission trading to around 6%. So as a part of the ETS, as we see in here, trial initiated by the MEMR, PLN already put successfully around 26 of our coal-fired power plant as a pilot of the ETS. So the MEMR set an emission cap for each of our coal-fired power plant category based on the weighted average of emission intensity of the coal power plant. So referring to this set cap, the power plant were able to calculate their emission allowance. Power plant that have unused allowance could sell the unused allowance to other who need more allowance. So during the ETS trial, PLN's coal power plant also offset their emission by purchasing carbon credit from the renewable energy power plant. So the carbon credit were generated through an international mechanism, what we call Verified Carbon Standard or VCS, as well as from the national mechanism, we call it in here Pembukuan Penurunan Emisi or PPE, or we call it emission reduction bookkeeping. So in the next slide, we saw that PLN has an experience to develop carbon credits. So we already started this carbon credit project since 2002, when PLN contribute to carbon market demonstration initiated by World Economic Forum. So PLN developed carbon credit project under both of compliance and voluntary mechanism. We call it compliance market or clean development mechanism. And then the second, we call it voluntary market verified carbon standard or VCS. So PLN has issued 7.9 million tons CO2 equivalent of the carbon credit from the VCS and CDM mechanism. So consisting of our 3 hydro power plant, which is equal to 350 megawatt, and 2 geothermal power plant, which is equal to 80 megawatt. So in our effort contribution to the ETS trial, we received 9 awards from the MEMR in 2021 by Subroto Awards, and a prestigious award given to the companies that contributed to the national energy efficiency effort. So PLN also recently established by the BOD directive regarding strategic policy on climate change. This policy provides a general guidance on climate change management, including carbon pricing. Detailed implementation and procedures are underway, and we will ensure that the alignment with the recently issued the Perpres 98/2021 regarding the carbon pricing. So during this ETS trial, PLN has developed the business process for the execution of the emission trading trial between power plants. For example, we have created accounting codes for both income and expense related to carbon pricing to ensure that these transactions are recorded and reported. So we have also developed the mechanism for allowing emission offset transaction between coal power plants with renewable energy power plant. So with the MEMR set a cap of the ETS trial based on the weighted average of coal plants, the GSG emission intensity. Meanwhile, the cap of this first phase of the carbon tax implementation will be set in early 2022. So this will determine the impact of carbon pricing for PLN. So we have conducted a preliminary simulation for our 4 cap scenario. The first scenario is the cap stays in the same trial caps, and the second and the third and the fourth scenario are 5, 10, and 15 stricter caps respectively. So based on the simulation result, we found that the emission trading can be implemented optimally if the cap revert to the value that has been set in the trial phase. So in this case, there will be a balance between the trading portion and the tax portion. So meanwhile, a 5% stricter emission cap will cause the share of the emission trading to be less than 6%, and 10% stricter cap will be reduced the trading portion to the less than 1%, and the 15% stricter caps will not allow any trading between power plants. So this is my last presentation. So thank you very much for your attention. So thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. begitu, Pak.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bu Sofi. Ibu.
Thank you, Miss Sophie. So now we have time for clarification. Nevertheless, because we have a slight delay and there are many other sessions, so I think the discussion will be shifted to the third session of today's FGD. So we will have more discussion after this. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that was the presentation of Ms. Emma, Mr. Bayu, and Ms. Sophie in the first session. And in the first session, we talked about how Indonesian climate policy is, what is the achievement of the ETS trial. And in the second session, we will listen about the international approaches on ETS design. And in this session, we would like to invite Jeremy Faroy as the moderator.
Thank you very much, Betsy, for moderating this very interesting first session. And I'm very pleased to be moderating the second session where our distinguished panelists are going to discuss international approaches to ETS scheme design in the power sector, and particularly in the context of regulated or partially regulated power markets. So for that, we are pleased to have with us today Kiran McNamara, who is a senior energy analyst at the International Energy Agency, or the IEA, the OECD sister organization, who is also jointly organizing this event with us and the other events to come. We also have two country experts who will share their respective countries' experience. So one is from China, Mr. Zhang Xiliang, who is a professor and director at the Institute of Energy, Environment and Economy at the Tsinghua University, as well as—
Hello, everyone.
Hello, as well as another country expert from Korea, Sung Son, who is a research fellow at the Korean Energy Economic Institute. So we are very happy to welcome them, and thanks for joining us today. Just before starting the panel discussion, just a quick housekeeping and reminder. I know this has been said in the first session, but good to remind. I'd like to remind the audience to please keep the camera switched off when not speaking, and obviously the microphone as well. And for the speakers, I hope they can keep on in time to the allocated time. So without further ado, we're now going to start the second session, and I would like to hand over the floor to Kiran McNamara to provide a scene-setting presentation on the different ways countries around the globe have approached ETS scheme in the power sector. Kiran, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Bati. My name is Kiran McNamara. I work in the Energy and Climate Change Unit in the International Energy Agency. The purpose of my brief presentation is to give you some background on international approaches to ETS design in the power sector, and more importantly, lessons learned from international experience. Normally in this presentation, we talk a lot about China and Korea, but given that we have two speakers from those countries here today, I will move on that. So firstly, the first question to ask is, what is the role of the ETS? What's its purpose? Is it to drive emissions reductions, or is it to provide a backstop for other policies? And over the course of the presentation, I'll give examples of both. Ideally, the carbon price will play a central, or if not the primary role in driving cost-effective emissions reductions in the power sector. But in reality, in the real world, the role of the carbon price is often limited by a number of factors. The first of these is governments and regulators often face constraints in implementing carbon prices at the level that would send a strong signal throughout the economy. In other words, the price doesn't always pass through directly to consumers and large energy users, or it isn't passed through fully in the costs of power generators. Secondly, there are multiple policy objectives within governments, and these coexist with emission reductions within the decarbonisation or energy emissions agenda. And an example of these would be energy access, energy affordability, economic goals, etc.
Thirdly, market failures often make it difficult for a carbon price signal to get through and do the role it's meant to do. And in this regard, we'll talk a little later in the presentation about the role of the design of the electricity market. So finally, governments tend to develop policies, packages of policies, of which carbon pricing may only be one important element. So why the power sector? Well, the emissions trading systems are an important means by which we can accelerate the decarbonisation of the power sector. Electricity and heat generation account for about 40% of global energy-related CO2 emissions, and the coal-fired power sector accounts for as much as 3/4 of this alone. The power sector is included in almost all operating ETS schemes at the moment, as well as in jurisdictions that are developing or thinking about developing or implementing an ETS. So the obvious question is, why start with the power sector? Well, firstly, the power sector is already in the process of decarbonising worldwide, owing to the falling cost of alternative low carbon technologies and also low competitiveness risks within many markets. But at the same time, this isn't happening fast enough to meet our climate goals, therefore the need for the ETS. Secondly, the power sector is well suited to the implementation of an ETS. There's two reasons for this. It's a large emitting sector. There are many alternative low greenhouse gas technologies available at a commercial rate. And secondly, there is a large bank of data available. This quality of the data is generally strong in most jurisdictions, and this allows regulators or policymakers establish benchmarks and transparency. Finally, many markets already have experience of implementing mitigation mechanisms in the power sector to support carbon pricing, for example, in the past to the clean development mechanism. The first ETS I'll talk about is within the EU. It's probably one of the older schemes, and it's probably one of the better known. It was launched in 2005, and it was initially designed as the primary tool of meeting the EU's 2012 Kyoto target in a cost-efficient manner. While since then it has met its stated goal in reducing the overall level of emissions in the power sector, where it has seen emissions fall by as much as 45%, the evidence suggests that it hasn't been the main driver of emissions reductions in the sector. And this is due to a number of design faults in the early days, such as the over-allocation of allowances and the resulting weak pricing signal. In other words, allowance prices were lower than they needed to be. Nonetheless, at times, the price of allowances was high enough to favour switching from gas to coal. And if you look at the chart there in the figure, you'll see early switching and switching post-2016 at times when the price of gas and the price of coals interacted as such there was an easy transition with the allowances. So why did the EU have low allowance prices? Firstly, was the unexpected low demand for allowances. And this was caused primarily by the interaction with other EU policies, such as stringent energy efficiency targets, as well as renewable energy policies. Also, the impact of the recession, the global recession in 2008-2009 was a critical juncture in the ETS. Now, the EU has made significant reforms since then, and as we head towards 2030, renewable energy and energy efficiency will play a significant role in meeting the overall 2030 targets for emissions reductions. But nonetheless, the ETS is expected to play a significant role, particularly as we head towards more stringent targets towards the end of this decade. And this isn't withstanding the current difficulties in the EU ETS market owing to high gas prices. Next, the UK is a very, very interesting example. Until recently, the United Kingdom was part of the European Union, therefore it was part of the European ETS. In 1990, it relied on coal for about 65% of its electricity demand. By 2005, this had reduced, but it was still more than a third. And the UK recognized early the need to transition away from coal to cleaner sources of power. And to do this, it acknowledged the fact that the EU ETS allowance price wasn't always at a level that suited them. And to address this, he introduced a carbon price support. And this was an additional cost of about £5 English on top per tonne of CO2 on top of the EU ETS in April 2013. This increased again in April 24 and again in April 2015, bringing up to as high as 18 British pounds per tonne of CO2. And what this meant in effect was that the carbon price floor in the UK ETS market was as high as 23 pounds per tonne of CO2. And this then triggered a dramatic shift away from coal in the power generation market towards natural gas. Obviously, this was supported by other complementary measures, such as significant energy efficiency measures, large amounts of renewable energy contracts, and significant government support. But the key factor in the UK, which applies worldwide, is the impact of the liberalised power market. The elevated levels of carbon prices were allowed pass through to consumers and large industrial users, and they were able to adopt their behaviour accordingly. Today, there are less than a handful of gas-fired or coal-fired power systems on the power plants on the UK system. Most of these are just providing system support, in other words, in case of emergencies or capacity tightness, or else they are slowly converting to other fuels such as gas or biomass. California is a very, very different example. Its cap and trade policy or system is intended as a backstop to other policies which the state relies on to deliver its main emissions reduction targets. And these include very strict measures in the transport sector, strong energy efficiency policies, and a huge growth in renewables over the last 20 years. However, what would happen if, for example, the renewables or the energy efficiency targets fail to do their job? The cap and trade in the power sector primarily would step in and fill the gap. Since 2009, we've seen a 60% decline in coal-fired power generation in California, but a recent analysis by the government on the effectiveness of the ETS has thought that the impact of the ETS is relatively modest compared to other policies, such as the renewable portfolio standards, rooftop solar, emissions performance standards, etc. But the important point is that the ETS has generated significant amounts of revenues, and these revenues have been recycled and directed towards these alternative schemes, which have driven the reduction in emissions. And they've also been used, and I think this is an important point, to support revenue or electricity tariffs for less well-off and vulnerable consumers. Another example in the United States is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiatives, which is the first mandatory ETS in the United States. It covers 11 states in the Midwest and the Northeastern region of the United States. It accounts for about a fifth of US GDP. Its formal aim, unlike California, was to reduce emissions from fossil fuel powered plants. In 2009, the cap was established. It was a little bit above actual emissions, and despite the downward revisions in subsequent years, it could be argued that it has had little impact on emission reductions. And like California, like the EU ETS, it can be argued that other policies such as support for renewables, energy efficiency, pollutant standards, etc., has had a bigger impact. And I think this serves to highlight in each of these three cases the interactions between the design of the ETS and how the ETS is implemented and other policies that the government is deciding on, such as energy efficiency and renewable. Nonetheless, a lot of work has been done in assessing the impact of the RGGI in terms of the power sector, and it has been argued that it has supported a drift away from fossil fuels towards large-scale renewables, but it also has delivered on other important goals, such as a stable source of revenue for the market, which has been recycled significantly to support other measures in the sector, again, to support vulnerable customers, to support energy efficiency measures, to support refurbishment of less well-off family housing, and also to invest in air pollution control and measures. The key feature in many of these markets is how the electricity market works and how the electricity market is structured. In a liberalized or free competitive market, the impact of effectively priced carbon allowance has a significant impact on the merit order of electricity dispatch. In other words, it raises the short-term variable cost of traditional fossil fuels, most significantly coal-fired plants. And this means that when the TSO establishes dispatch for the following day, coal-fired plant and highly polluting open-cycle gas-fired plants slip down the merit order in favor of less polluting gas and renewables. Over the long term, this then facilitates investments away from polluting power plant and towards cleaner forms of electricity, or in some cases to more efficient and less polluting forms of fossil fuel, or investments in CCUS. But in reality, the world is very different. In most markets are either partially or fully regulated, where vertically integrated utilities, often owned by governments or state-owned enterprises, exist. Therefore, the power generators may be limited in the decisions they're making in terms of investment or generation, and consumers face regulated wholesale and electricity retail prices. And I think a good example of this is the Korean market, which you'll learn a little bit more about shortly. If you have highly regulated electricity prices, and we see this not just in the developing world or emerging economies, but we also see it in a lot of OECD or some OECD member countries, the carbon price signal may not be visible to consumers. And for example, large industrial users of energy may not see the correct price signals to change their behavior. Or in the generation market, it may not have enough of an impact to shift the merit order and alter investment decisions that generators or system operators are making in the long term. So, what can Indonesia learn from what's happening elsewhere in the world? Firstly, obviously, the power sector is the major source of emissions, and policymakers and regulators in Indonesia need to examine how the carbon price signals affect potential emissions reductions, not just in terms of the volume, but also in terms of how investments are made, how the power sector is dispatched, and how the wholesale and retail markets interact and operate. As you can see, the ETS operates most effectively in markets where the carbon price signal can pass through across to all market suppliers, influencing their decisions in terms of how they consume and produce energy. There are plenty of options available to regulators and to policymakers to strengthen and reflect the carbon price to end users, but this depends to a large extent on the institutional arrangements within the country. A very, very important point that sometimes is neglected is that ETS auctions to allocate permits raise substantial revenues. And the challenge for governments and policymakers is how to best use these revenues. For example, they can be used to invest in further climate mitigation actions such as energy efficiency or infrastructure resilience, or they can be used to address institutional problems, distributional problems, such as compensating low-income households or expanding energy access in rural areas by means of renewable energies or mini grids or other forms of new low-carbon technologies. A very, very important point, and I think we can see that throughout all of the case studies, and I think it'll also be clear from the Korean Chinese examples, is the need to be very, very careful in assessing the interactions between the design of the ETS and other energy-related policies, which may be focused on the same goals, such as air pollution control, the expansion of renewable energies, energy efficiency, economic restructuring or reform of the power sector. Finally, and a very, very important point that's worth bearing in mind, the actual and practical policy implementation of an ETS in the power sector needs to be designed in a way that fits with local contexts and integrates with other policy priorities. What works in one country may not apply to another, therefore great care must be taken on designing the ETS. Thank you very much. That's the end of this presentation, and I look forward to hearing from China and Korea over the coming minutes.
Thank you very much, Kieran, for this very interesting presentation. And so now we're gonna move over to the presentations of our two country experts. So we're gonna start first with Zhang Ziliang, who will tell us about China's experience implementing its ETS scheme in the power sector. As you know, China is operating its ETS since 2021, and it's I believe one of the largest, if not the largest, world's largest ETS scheme. So we're really pleased to hear how they've approached it, and if they could share any lessons that could be useful for Indonesia as well. So Zhang, the floor is yours.
Sorry. So I try to solve the problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can see the screen. You can also see the screen.
Yeah, I can see.
Oh.
I can see. Can you make it full screen?
Okay, I will do that. It works?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's really a great pleasure to be here to join this very interesting panel. So I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some of my observations on China's national carbon market program development. So we know that now actually I think China's ETS system development started so with the 7 regional pilots in the year 2013. So that means it's 7 years ago China start. So the preparation or the construction of the ETS program, but primarily so in 7 regions as a trial. I think it's very much a similar approach adopted here. So in Indonesia, and China's national carbon market or the China's national emission trading program start operation. So on July 16 this year. So in the power generation sector, so with a carbon price approximately $7. So this is the development so of China's ETS program. So I think from based on my observation, so I think it's very important to for the ETS program design is that so the actual situation of a nation should be fully taken into account. This is very important. So for example, in China, so those are the so-called unique circumstances for the China's national ETS program. So that first is the emissions. You know, China, the primary sector of CO2 emission are the power sector and the industry sector. So the two sectors totally so accounts for approximately 80% of China's energy-related CO2 emission. So let's say China's ETS program target at the two sectors, and also we also see it's very important. So in China and also in other developing nations, the energy market is not complete. So it's partial. In China, the price of electricity and heat is heavily regulated. So under these circumstances, it's difficult to introduce the auction or loss allocation approach because the loss allocation the auction approach will significantly increase the cost of the power generation companies. Those costs is difficult to be passed on to the users and the electricity consumers. So and also so it's quite difficult to create incentives for the electricity users and the customers to take action to take electricity conservation and saving actions. So it's and also it's not fair. So among the cost and the responsibility sharing, so among the power generation sectors and also the users of the electricity and heat. So I think those are the two important conditions or actual situation for the designers of the China's ETS program to be considered. So as a result, so this is the general is the overview of China's national ETS program. Firstly, China's ETS program for the sectoral coverage, it covers 8 sectors. So you can see here largely so that the electricity sector and also all the energy intensive sectors. So and also regarding the emission, so the China's ETS program does not only regulate the direct emissions from the burning of the fossil fuels. So in the companies and the manufacturer companies and the power sector, but also the indirect emissions associated so with the uses of electricity and heat. So this is very much aimed to address so the incomplete electricity market issues. So this is I have mentioned earlier. So and also the threshold. So the threshold is about 26,000 tons, and as China's national emission trading program will regulate approximately 8,500 companies. So that's for China. China is a big nation. So those numbers is not big. That means that means that the management cost for the government is not so high for the national emission trading program. So and the total emissions of China is about 6.7 billion tons, or approximately 72% of China's total energy-related CO2 emission. So you can see with a limited number of companies, the program so they can regulate a large part of China's CO2 emission. So regarding the cap setting, so it's a hybrid approach. So it's a hybrid approach combining the top-down approach, which integrates the cap of the ETS program with the national mitigation targets, and also the bottom-up approach. The bottom-up approach is very much taking into account the potentials of the CO2 emission and the costs of the mitigation, so etc. So actually, so generally speaking, so it's a hybrid approach for the cap setting. So and for the allowance allocation, the primary allocation method is the output-based free allocation. Although so the auction approach is also under investigation, but just I mentioned because of the incomplete the market nature of the electricity sector, so it's quite difficult to introduce a full allocation approach. So as it's done so in the EU market and also the California the market. So now, so this slide shows the major the sector coverage of China's ETS program, and so you can see for the power generation sector, almost all the generation units have been part of the national emission trading program. For the other energy intensive industries, also a larger part of the the companies the production capacity and also be put so in a has been regulated by the emission trading program. So now so because it's China's regarding the nature of China emission trading program, so I think it's essentially a multi-region and a multi-sector tradable performance standards. So it's not it's not the traditional cap and trade program. So I think it's different from how the emission trading program. So in the EU and also the California. So I think this is the first phase of the China emission trading program. It's a tradable performance standards. But in the future, so that the program can be transformed so into a traditional cap and a trade program. So I think I will stop here and I would like to to hear what happens in the California, and also I'll be happy to answer your questions regarding China's emission trading program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation and for keeping on time. So let's move now to South Korea, and here the country's experience implementing its own ETS scheme, which I believe has been operating since 2015, being one of East Asia's first such scheme. And so I would like now to hand the floor over to In-Sung Sun for their presentation. In-Sung Sun, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm trying to share slides. Give me a second, please.
Okay, so we can hear you. Do you have any slides? Are you going to share slides with us?
Okay. Okay, this one. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm In-Sung Son from Korea Energy Economics Institute. I'm very happy to introduce Korea Emission Trading Scheme to you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Today, I will briefly introduce Korea Emission Trading Scheme, focusing on the target gases and sectors, allowance allocation methods, flexibility mechanism, and regulation of indirect emissions. In January 2015, Korea introduced the nationwide mandatory greenhouse gas emissions trading scheme for the first time in East Asia. The Korea greenhouse gas emission trading scheme is operated on phases. The first phase was operated during 2015 to 2017, and the second phase was operated during 2018 to 2020. The third phase is now running from 2021 to 25. Before introducing Korean K-ETS, Korea implemented greenhouse gases and energy target management systems. The system is a sort of command and control type regulation. The system induces the designated companies to set and comply with GHG reduction and energy saving goals. Target management system facilitated the collection of verified emission data, which in turn are used to determine total amount of allowances that is capped for the first phase. In addition, companies have been able to train in the monitoring, reporting, and verification process. This system will still apply to smaller entities not covered by K-ETS. I'd like to note the importance of Mrb process, the experience in Mrb process. EU ETS experienced the collapse of allowance price during the first phase. It is said that one of the reasons for the allowance price collapse is oversupply of the total allowance. At the time, total allowance that is capped was determined based on the estimated emissions in EU, because EU didn't have accurate and verified emissions data for companies. However, Korea implemented a target management system before introducing K-ETS. So the collected, weighed, and verified emission data from the target management system help to set accurate total allowance. Next. Next, let me briefly explain the kinds of greenhouse gases and sectors covered by KETS. The KETS includes all 6 greenhouse gases: CO2, CH4, N2, HFCs, PFCs, and SFCs, stipulated in the Kyoto Protocol as target greenhouse gases. Firms should submit allowances equal to the emissions of all 6 greenhouse gases. In the case of EU ETS, the 6 greenhouse gases are identified as target greenhouse gases. However, in practice, only CO2 emitted from fuel combustion and PFCs and N2 from some industrial processes are regulated. Meanwhile, Korea emission trading scheme is characterized by regulating not only direct emissions, but also indirect emissions from the use of electricity and heat supplied from outside the company, taking into account the electricity market structure. KETS applied to 6 sectors: transformation, industry and transportation, waste, building, and public and others. The transformation sector includes power and heat generation. The industrial sector includes iron and steel, petrochemical, cement, oil refinery, and non-ferrous metals, paper, glass and ceramics, mining, and electronics, and semiconductors, displays, or automobile and shipbuilding. From the third page, construction is also included in KETS. In the case of transportation sector, only domestic airlines was included until the second page. However, from the third page, it has expanded to include railroads, road freight and passengers, and maritime transportation. As a result, for 2019, 610 companies were included in 6 sectors. However, for the third page, the number of companies increased to 683. 683. Next, in the case of EU ETS, it is announced that it planned to introduce an emission trading system for building and road transport through the Fit for 55 policy packaging in 2021. The EU's emission trading system for building and road transport will operate separately from the existing emission trading system for power generation and industrial sectors. And as in the case of Germany, the system is expected to operate for fuel supplies for building and transportation, that is the upstream sectors. However, KETS is characterized by including the downstream sector of building and road transport as a point of regulation. As a result, the targeted greenhouse gases and sectors of KETS are wider than other emission trading systems. Next, I will explain among the main design elements of the emission trading scheme. I will briefly explain allowance allocation method and flexibility mechanisms. During the first phase, all allowances were allocated free of charge. The most of the free allowance were given out based on historical GHG emissions. This method is known as grandfathering. Only 3 subsectors are applied by benchmarking allocation. From the second page, allocation through auction was introduced. The portion of auctioned allowances was 3%, More specifically, companies subject to free allocation received all the allocated allowance for free. However, company not subject to free allocation must buy 3% of the allocated allowance through auction. From the third page, the portion of the auctioned allowance was increased to 10%, and the portion is expected to increase gradually. The pre-allocation methods largely include historical emission-based methods and historical activity data-based methods. The former, known as grandfathering, has been criticized as rewarding higher emitters while not taking into account all the actions. In contrast to grandfathering, the latter, known as benchmarking, does not have the effect of providing more free allocation to highest emitting companies. Benchmark allocation based on their production performance instead of their historical emission. GHG intensive companies will receive less free allowance relative to their production compared to highly efficient companies. This drives inefficient companies to take action to cover their excess emissions. Therefore, ETS has tried to expand benchmark allocation. Benchmark allocation applied to 3 industries during the first phase: refinery and cement, domestic aviation, and 7 industries applied to 7 industries during the second phase, adding electricity generation, district heating for residential, and district heating for industry complex, and waste. And for the third phase, totally 12 industries are applied by benchmark, including iron and steel, and petrochemical, building, paper, and timber. We plan to apply product benchmark first as much as possible, such as EU ETS, and apply heat or fuel benchmarks if it is not easy to apply product benchmarks. ETS apply the flexibility mechanism of banking, borrowing, and offset. Extra allowances can be carried over within the same phase to the next implementation year or the first implementation year of the next phase. In the case of borrowing, if the amount of allowances to submit is insufficient, some of the allowances to be allocated for the following implementation year may be borrowed. ETS imposes quantitative restrictions on the amount of banking and borrowing. And for the offset, regulated companies can convert greenhouse gas reduction from projects outside the company's boundaries into credit so that they can trade or use them to comply. Domestic reduction projects conducted outside the boundaries of regulated companies and CDM projects in foreign countries implemented by domestic companies can be approved as outside project. Offset from outside project can be submitted up to 10% of the allowance to be submitted in each implementation year. The last one will be indirect emissions. Greenhouse gas reduction in the power generation sector occurs through 2 channels. The first is to improve facility efficiency, to switch into low carbon fuels, or to increase the portion of renewable energies through GHG reduction investments. Second channel is there is an indirect effect of inducing consumers to reduce electricity consumption by reflecting the reduction cost in power generation sector in electricity price. This results in a decrease in power generation and emissions. And theoretically, as allowances are allocated to power generation sector and greenhouse gas reduction costs in the power generation sector are appropriately transferred to the electricity price, electricity consumers reduce the demand according to the increase in the price. However, in Korea's electricity market, power generation costs are not firmly linked to the electricity price, and it is not easy to properly transfer the emission reduction cost, including purchasing cost of allowances, to electricity price. This is because the government regulates the increase in electricity price, taking into account the inflation. In this situation, if only direct emissions from the power generation and industrial sectors are regulated, the use of fossil fuels in industrial sector will be replaced rapidly by electricity, adding to the burden on the power generation sector. In order to prevent the rapid conversion of fossil fuels in industrial sector, ETS has also decided to regulate indirect emissions from electricity used in industrial sector. Although indirect emission regulations were included for the above reasons, it is also true that there are several problems caused by including indirect emissions. As the electricity price began to reflect the compliance cost of the power generation sector, the industrial sector will bear part of the mandatory compliance cost of the power generation sector, along with the cost of allowance for indirect emissions. In addition, regulating indirect emission is likely to increase the uncertainty of allowance prices. Therefore, I think there is a possibility that rediscussion in the future as to whether to maintain indirect emissions regulation will occur. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you very much, In-Sung-Son, for sharing these insights, and that was very interesting. We are slightly behind schedule, so I would like now to give the opportunity to the audience to ask a few clarification questions, and I would like to add that unfortunately Mr. Zhang Ziliang will have to leave us a little bit sooner than expected, so if you have any clarification question on his presentation, please ask him now if you can. Yeah, so please just let us know if you have any questions, or you can put them in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand, and I'm happy to give you the floor. Any question? Okay.
Maybe we can do it in the
yeah.
session, Jeremy.
Yes. Yeah. So if not, I just suggest to move on to the last session, to the discussion session, where we can perhaps open the floor to the audience and ask questions on the first and second sessions more broadly. So I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for their very insightful interventions, which I'm pretty sure will fuel a very fruitful discussion in the next session. And I will now just hand back over to Bati to moderate this the last discussion.
Terima kasih Pak Jeremy atas moderator.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for being the moderator for the second session. This is an open discussion session. I'd like to inform, before we start the open discussion, I'd like to invite several responses. From my list, we have ADB, we have GGI, we have OJK, and PJB. I'd like to invite Florian Key from ADB. Maybe Florian can explain to us what is your experience or ADB's experience in helping the countries, your program, your experience related to this topic. Florian, the floor is yours.
Are you with us, Florian?
Florian,
Thank you so
with
much.
us?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Pak Bati, and thanks also to the presenters, and big hello to Busintia Bukamia, our PLN friends, but also to the government, and thanks to the Chinese and Korean colleagues for the in-depth presentation of the carbon market schemes in these two countries and member states of the ADB. Let me first note in response to your question, Pak Bati, ADB is working very closely with Indonesia on the Article 6 under the COP process with the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs, and Indonesia is also a member of our carbon market program, which is looking at the possible establishment of a regional market. In that, we're also working very closely with our colleagues at PLN, and especially Bukamia under Bu Sophie's direction, on helping PLN, as Bu Sophie presented, implement the necessary SOPs, as well as the monitoring, reporting, and verification for the carbon market trading system. More generally, and I know I don't have that much time, we're close to the end, let me note I would really like to congratulate the government on this milestone on passing the presidential regulation on the establishment of a carbon market. And we're very much looking forward to the necessary implementing regulations that will structure how Indonesia will go forward with both the carbon tax and the ETS trading system. From our point of view, and if we look at, I mean, also looking at some of the questions that I saw already on the chat box, it's very important to set the price right. And I think the question came from Bapanas. In our view, I mean, Singapore, for example, set a very low price in the beginning as well. So we do think, given the current state of the economy, it's important to also safeguard the economy. But it's also important to think long-term in this. I mean, the ETS will be around, carbon market trading will be around, and to already plan for step-by-step increases. Singapore has done this, and I think it has been quite successful. So that would be one of the comments we have from ADB side. Second, and I will finish after that and give the floor to others and not hug it, I would really like to comment Kieran on the presentation. I think there was a lot in there for Indonesia. I mean, we're in basically a fully regulated market. So pricing cannot be passed on to consumers currently. Prices are fully regulated. And also via the power purchase agreements, right? The prices are for that PLN pays to private sector are regulated. So I think in that it's quite important to think through not just the ETS alone in the electricity sector, but combine that with future regulatory reform. So I think all in all, we really have to take a long-term view based on the very important lessons from the first trial phase, and make sure that already inbuilt some of the medium-term to long-term perspectives in the implementing regulations and the next phase for the ETS trading in Indonesia. Let me stop here and hand it back to you, Pa.
Oh, terima kasih. Thank you, Florian. Nanti kita akan Bapak Ibu.
Thank you, Florian.
Ada sesi yang lebih
we'll have
langsung gitu ya. Nah, tapi
more in-depth session, but before that session, I'd like to invite Triple GI. We have Kurnia. I heard that Triple GI has some programs on ETS. And in the future, this is something that the government can utilize in terms of how to develop a strategy or strategies related to ETS. Pak Kurnia, are you with us?
I think she's left, but she sent a message in the chat saying that she unfortunately has to leave, and she provided a written comment explaining the GGI collaboration with the Indonesian government.
Oh,
ETS.
I see. We move to OJK.
Okay, let's move on to OJK. Ibu Isti? Oh. Pak Kurnia, are you with us? I think he's there.
We cannot hear you, Pak. Belum terdengar, Pak.
We still can't hear you, Pak.
Baik, mungkin next question mungkin ya. Jadi
okay, let's go to the next question.
Ketika ada kesempatan, barangkali ada komen dari OJK. Apa saja kira-kira?
Probably there is a comment from OJK to support ETS in the future. Ibu Isti?
Ya, Pak Bati. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, Pak Wanhar.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kiran, Pak Wanhar. I'm Isti from OJK. I'll use bahasa Indonesia. So generally, OJK has submitted the second phase of the roadmap. So we have several focuses on several programs. And this is a concern of OJK. And by the end of this year, we will submit to the public of the green taxonomy. This is the first stage, and this is a very crucial milestone related to our effort
yang tergolong hijau. Kemudian yang kedua memang
so that we know which businesses are considered green. And related to the carbon exchange, we are preparing the operations of carbon exchange based on the government's policies. And this is our government's commitment to implement the carbon market in Indonesia. And we are ready if we are given the role as a regulator of this carbon market in the secondary market through the capital market. And later, when we are observing this or monitoring this, we will prepare the infrastructure and create the ecosystem and the taxonomy that is now being prepared by OJK with the coordination with the related ministries. And we are still developing the framework of the risk management, and we have to prepare the evaluation and monitoring system, and we need to prepare the development scheme as well. We have seen the financing scheme, especially in the regional related to the energy transition mechanism. And definitely we'll need the capacity building and all stakeholders and the finance services, and it should be multi-years. And we have created a task force related to this. And this is a forum for partnership and coordination to respond to the sustainability of sustainable financial system related to the carbon pricing as well and other schemes. Okay, thank you, Pak Bati. Thank you, Mbak Isti, Ibu Isti, for the preparation of OJK related to this topic. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will start answering your questions in the chat box. We have a lot of interesting questions. We can start from, also we have 4 questions. And I think it is suitable for the government, Pak Bayu. Say, for example, in the chat box, we can see that there's a question: is this, will we continue this ETS trial, or should we wait for firmer regulations? And who will release the SPE? And will the cap refer to the trial cap or other caps? And the 4th question is
the standalone BESS tender, which is the first of its kind in India. So there's going to be a little bit more for us to figure out how this will work. There is a floating PV also.
Sorry, I think. Pertanyaan keempat tentang.
Okay, so the 4th question. Who will set the carbon pricing? Okay, Pak Bayu. Probably Pak Bayu, maybe you can respond to the questions. Okay, thank you, Pak Bati. I'll answer these questions in Bahasa Indonesia. Okay, so the first question, will we continue the ATS? So we already have the previous regulations, number 46, year 2017. So from 2021 to 2024, it is possible to do it voluntarily until 2025. So 2025, it will be mandatory for this carbon market.
Nomor 98 tahun 2021 yang concern akan nilai.
So the regulation that is concerned about carbon value, we need to maintain the NDC target. So this is our lesson learned. So later we can estimate how much is our carbon and how can we achieve the NDC. So that's the first answer. Second point, who's going to publish or issue the SPA? The Ministry of Environment and Forestry will be the lead for all certification and also the ETS trial. We, as part of the sector, would actually adhere to the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, or the MOF, and Ms. Emma can respond to that better. And third, regarding the cap, do you think you will refer to the trial cap? This trial is actually our first step, and that will be a reference for the following plan. And we will have a lot of considerations, such as what have been stated by the previous speakers, and we are open to discussion. And later, we will make further consideration before we set the cap in the following year until 2024, pursuant to the presidential or the government regulation of 2017. And during the trial, how do we set the carbon? And pursuant to the Presidential Regulation number 98 of 2021, we shall coordinate with Ministry of Environment and Forestry as the key actor, and Ms. Emma can further elaborate because the MOEF or the Ministry of Environment will make a collaboration with the sectors, and they will understand about the activities in each sector. And as she has presented, many sectors will be monitored. So I think it will be more suitable if Bu Emma responded to that question. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Mr. Bayu. So, Ms. Emma, would you like to continue the answer? Ms. Emma?
Ya, tidak ada respon dari Bu Emma. Kita ke pertanyaan.
She's not responding yet. Let's move on to the next question from Mr. Waluyo from MKI. Perhaps it has been responded by Florian. And as presented by Kieran from IEA, they have the parity if it's implemented in Indonesia. So who's the one who has to pay for the burden? And perhaps international experts such as Kieran or Korea, Mr. In Sang-sun, we would like to invite you to respond or to comment on that question. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bati. This is Kieran here. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, question is, in the chat box, it said that Pak Waluyo right that as I understood from the presentation of IEA, in the UK, the ETS is effective with the price as high as 18 euro per ton. What is the parity number for comparison if it implemented in Indonesia? Who should bear the cost if implemented in Indonesia? As it will rather be difficult to be borne to the customer. What do you think, Kieran?
Just in the UK, it was a special pricing mechanism to ensure that the price of the allowances didn't drop below a certain level, because they felt that the carbon prices on the European market were lower than they needed to be to incentivize a shift away from high polluting carbon intensive generation. So it's a little different. In the case of Indonesia, it's more complex. It depends on a number of factors, such as the structure of the power sector, how your carbon market is going to function, how the allowances are allocated, what the initial price of the allowances is likely to be, etc. And in this regard, the trial is a very, very useful starting price. And if you look at what happened in any of the other examples, they got a lot of things wrong at the start. Either there were too many allowances, the allowances were priced too low, the intensity cap may have been set at the wrong level, etc. So your trial period is the start of your learning experience, along with learning from international experience elsewhere. And I think your trial period has provided a lot of very, very useful information that you can take back to the ministries and present, and use that information then to inform the next stage of your decision making as to how the market will actually work. In terms of the costs, over the longer run, we would anticipate that there may be higher costs on generators, but it's about how these costs are allocated. A lot of the behavior of power generators around the world is having huge negative implications or externalities on society as a whole. And this is a mechanism to reallocate those costs. The revenues generated from the ETS should be used then recycled to benefit all of society, the energy efficiency measures, support for less well-off consumers, and support for energy access in other regions. So it's not a matter of costs, it's a matter of the allocation of those costs on those that are causing the most negative externalities on society. I hope this helps in some way.
Okay. Any response from In Sung Song, the Korean expert? Kiran. Okay, please.
I'm sorry. I think Kira already answered the question. Is it correct? Do you want me to answer for the same question, or there is your question?
No. Okay. Like this. Other question maybe. This is for Kiran and also for In Sung Song. After seeing the result of Indonesia's ETS trial, the Ibu Asri write that I would like to know the response and evaluation from the international expert. Do you think Indonesia need a stricter cap and higher carbon price?
I think.
What do you think?
It depends on their ambition of Indonesia for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's because if you set high price, you can reduce much emissions. However, it means if at the same time setting high price through or from the low cap or low total allowance may have the negative impact on your economy. So you have to consider both of them, the reducing greenhouse gases and possible impact on your economy. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's my answer for your question. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Kiran, do you have other comment for that? Whether Indonesia have to make a stricter cap?
No, I think In Sung has made a very, very good point. But in the earlier presentations, we saw some of the long run scenarios for Indonesia. And I think the government needs to be looking at those scenarios and looking at the set of policies that are going to deliver on those outcomes and recent commitments from the government announced at COP beforehand. And it may be possible that a higher price is needed to put Indonesia on some of those trajectories for its long-term goals or a stricter cap. So ultimately, it's up to the government of Indonesia to decide based on its own circumstances. But I think In Sung has made a very, very good point. A high price might deliver quick decarbonisation, but it also may have an impact on the economy and society. So the government has to make a very, very balanced decision in that regard. But ultimately, what are the long-term goals and how do you plan on getting there? And what role is the ETS going to play in that? Are important questions you have to address.
Yeah, thank you, Kiran and In Sung. Terima kasih, Kiran dan In Sung.
Thank you, Kiran and In Sung. And then we have some questions actually, but I perceive the participants are interested with Ms. Sophie's presentation. I see that Ms. Sophie is no longer with us in this FGD, but perhaps we still have a team from PLN that can explain to us, as presented by Ms. Sophie, you provided a simulation where when we try to tighten the cap, it will create an implication to the balance between tax and trade. So perhaps you can give further elaboration. Hopefully the PLN or the utilities company can help us in responding, because I think the question is quite interesting. The audience is interested to find out about the simulation all the PLN experience. Yes, thank you, Mr. Bati. I'm Komang Parmita. Let me introduce myself as one of Ms. Sophie's staff. I'm responsible in environment sector, including climate change. And I'll try to answer it. Hopefully, it's okay if it's in Indonesian language. So there was a question from Ms. Sarah Muarif and also from the other question. The first, how can we understand better about the scheme if, can you go back to the slide? Yes, this one. If there is a tightening on the target of the emission intensity, what will be the consequences against the trade and tax? We have observed the presidential regulation number 28 regarding the cap and tax scenario. And previously, it was explained that in 2021, that the PLN has given a target on our emission cap. The coal-fired power plant, for example, if we refer to the cap that has been trialed, in our simulation, if we see the potential of trade and tax, you can see it from the right side. It's almost 50-50. So 50% there will be trade between the power plant with coal power and emission quota. Once half is above and half is below 50%. So it is enabling some trading. And when the trade is concluded, for those units who hasn't fulfilled their emission quota, they will be charged with the tax scheme. And with the determined cap, during the trial, there will be 50% of trade and 50% of tax. And how about when the emission intensity will be tightened? For example, 0.9, and then we reduce it to become 0.8. Or if we see the data, the tightening will be 5%. And what happens if it's 5% stricter? The trade will occur only 6.2% of transaction. And on top of it, there will be no transaction because the cap and tax and trade scheme is actually prioritizing the trade. If there is no trade, it will be penalized with tax. And with stricter cap, what will be dominant is the taxation. And how about when the cap will be stricter up to 10%? 99.9% transaction is in the form of tax. And tax is by government, right? But trade can be implemented between those power plants. And when the cap is stricter, up to 15%, there will be no trade. It will be pure taxation. So that's the answer to respond to Ms. Sarah Muarif's question. Hopefully, I can answer her question. And so that the cap and trade and tax scheme can be implemented, the emission cap that will be determined hopefully can be implemented either next year, and we hope that the cap and trade and tax scheme can be implemented in our internal company. That's all my answer, Mr. Bati. And perhaps I'd like to answer a question. This is Ms. Christie's question on ETS scheme in the power plant, whether it shall refer to the presidential regulation number 68 regarding the economic value of carbon. If we refer to presidential regulation number 68, we have 4 schemes that has been regulated. One of it is carbon trade, and the other one is carbon tax, tax on carbon. So we as the regulator will implement the presidential regulation, and eventually the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, perhaps Ms. Emma can respond to that, will have the subordinate law of presidential regulation number 98 so that we can implement it in a better way. So there should be technical guideline, and it will be stipulated by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. We look forward to it. We want to see how that we can execute the carbon trade value and then the tax on carbon. So we label it as cap and tax and trade scheme. So hopefully I can respond to your question. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Komang. That was a very elaborative response. And we will continue. There's an interesting question from Mr. Setya. Whether the carbon price should be set by the government in a fixed price or fixed cost, or it should be based on the market. What is actually the influencing factors based on international experiences? Do you think the price could be different between one sector to another sector? I'd like to invite not only one person, so perhaps some of you can share on how or should it be better if we make it as a fixed price, or the price may fluctuate. I'd like to invite Kieran and also Mr. Insang, and perhaps the other party can also respond, perhaps Flori from other country. The time is yours.
I think the question is about the price versus quantity problem. So theoretically, they should be the same under the ideal circumstances. However, yeah, it's not easy to derive the same result, and as the previous answers, it depends on the outcome of discussion between government and stakeholders. It's because tax may make some refusal because of the wording. So some stakeholders from the industry may prepare the emission trading instead of tax. However, in my opinion, yeah, usually theory economic theory represent that tax is prepared to emissions trading in regulating greenhouse gases, but it's completely the result of a theory. Yeah, so I think government and stakeholders from power generation and industry should have discussed about this problem a lot. It's because tax may have may give industry some flexibilities of emissions. It's because firms can decide to emit more given fixed prices. However, under the emission trading, the cap or the total amount of emissions industries can emit is fixed. So it's not easy. It's not easy for firms to emit more than total allowances. And so actually, it's not easy problem to answer right now. Yeah, but my answer is it depends on the result of your discussions between government and industries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Insam. Kiran, do you have any comment?
Thank you, Insam.
Fluctuate.
This is Kieran here. I think most of the international experience has suggested that governments or regulators get the price wrong at the outset. They set it either too low or too high, and if it's set too low, there's very, very little incentive to switch away from fossil-intensive power generation. But ideally, the market should set the price, and that goes back to what Inson spoke about earlier, the depth and the width of the market, the amount of participants, the level at which the cap is set, the power mix, the structure of the market. So it depends on a whole series of factors. But ideally, the government should be setting the price, the initial price, at a level that incentivizes the market to evolve and incentivizes trade and activity in the market from the outset. So I think it's a complex design issue. There's no right answer to the correct price other than to ensure that it's not set too low or too high. But it needs to be set at a price that stimulates activities. And most of the markets we've seen have had a number of interventions on the price levels. You can see in the UK, the price was too low at the EU level to stimulate what they wanted to see in their power market, and they introduced the carbon price floor. Germany and other countries have introduced measures. In the United States, the RGGI in California reduced their cap every year, and that has an impact on prices. So there's no straight answer for that, but ideally the market should set the price. Great care needs to be taken when determining the original price or the open.
Okay, thank you Kiran. Bapak Ibu sekalian, ternyata dari jawaban internasional.
Ladies and gentlemen, from these international experts, we don't really have a firm answer that it should be fixed or fluctuated. There are a lot of things to be considered. So we have a lot of homework for Indonesia. We have a lot of homework. So let's use this series of discussion to explore these topics. So basically, we are running out of time because it's already like 4:30 p.m. here. Just 1 minute. Florence, probably you can jump in to give comments. Florence? If there is no further comments. Okay, so this is the third session, and this is actually the closing session. I will have from IGA. Oh, Florence, are you there?
Yes, I am there. What can I comment on?
Just comment on whether the price should be fixed or fluctuated. What do you think in other experience?
Well, I don't have a firm answer on this. I think that depends on really the structure of the mechanism and its interaction with the tax in the end. From the view of the tax, as noted before, we think given the current floor price, it would be good to have a long-term plan on raising the price.
Okay, long-term plan to raising the price. Thank you, Florian. Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya yakin masih banyak pertanyaan di.
Thank you very much, Florian. I believe you have a lot of questions, and I believe we haven't answered all of your questions in the chat box, but we will forward your questions to our experts, and later probably they can reply your questions through emails. Okay, now it's already 4:31. It means we have run out of time. And for the closing remarks, I will invite Sarah from AIG to give the closing remarks in our event. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Babati. I think we've run out of time, so I won't take too long. So I'm Sarah Morev, Head of Environment and Climate Change Unit at the IEA, and it's been really wonderful to collaborate with colleagues at the OECD to set up these FGDs. And I really want to thank all the speakers and the participants. It's been very, very interesting. I think we've seen a lot of questions, a lot of scope for discussion. And as I think we've heard different experts from countries respond to some of these questions, there are no necessarily right or wrong answers in how a country decides to set up its ETS. It's dependent on many factors. It's something that is not fixed in time. These things evolve in time as well. So I think what we're hoping for with these FGDs is that bringing together these discussions and these insights help with that decision-making process and the dialogues that will happen as the carbon market is set up in Indonesia. And I personally really appreciate all the presentations and the explanations, and found this very interesting. And I just want to close to let people know, as Cecilia was mentioning in the beginning of the session, that this will be a series of 4 FGDs. And we are hoping to hold the second FGD that will look at more specific design elements of an ETS in terms of links with industry, transitioning from pilots to regular systems, revenues, specific issues at our next SGD that is supposed to be planned for the week of December 13th. And then there will be 2 more FGDs following early next year. So we really hope to continue this engagement and this discussion. And thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Sarah. Bapak Ibu semuanya, terima kasih telah berpartisipasi.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in this discussion. My apologies if there are a lot of flaws and mistakes. Some presentations have been provided in the chat box. We have links there, and you can download the materials. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you all.
Makasih Pak Bati, Jinli.
Terima kasih, Pak Bati.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.